We're very blessed this morning to have Jerry Tallman with us. Jerry is certainly not a stranger to many of us here at Sunset, and we're glad that he's come home for a few days. Jerry has spent the last 43 years preaching Christ and sharing the gospel message to thousands in personal Bible studies. Jerry has developed and honed a method for talking to others, whether you are talking to them at their front door, in restaurants, on the street, or talking to any of your friends, co-workers, or family members. Jerry's always searching for lost souls and looking to teach the gospel. If you've never gone out to eat with Jerry or something, you know you have 15 or 20 personal work opportunities as you go through the door and all that, and I appreciate his spirit for reaching out to the lost. Jerry retired from full-time congregational preaching in Rochester, Michigan. He and his wife Connie then sold their home, moved into a motor home, and traveled all around the country teaching others the gospel and training Christians to teach a Bible study he developed called His Eternal Plan. And you can get one of those at the bookstore if you'd like to have it. It's a great Bible study. We are blessed to have Jerry drive into Lubbock from time to time and teach us here at Sunset and work beside us. With John Orr, who spoke to us last week, Jerry, along with other dedicated Christians, work with a group called Home Mission, a ministry dedicated to teaching the lost, helping churches grow, and teaching people how to be evangelists. We're grateful for that work. Jerry held a dozen or so different workshops in congregations from Washington to Pennsylvania and from Michigan to Texas. And if you know your geography, that means about everywhere. Jerry is also an accomplished artist and has produced hundreds of art pieces, but more than anything else, he is a great Christian man. We're glad to have him here with us this morning. Jerry, come preach the word.
This passage that was just read from Romans chapter 10 gets my attention every time I read it. Because I meet so many Christians as we travel around the country that do not realize that they have been sent. They think that the preacher is the fellow that stands behind the pulpit, but it's a proclaimer, anybody that tells good news, and how beautiful that is for God to be glorified because people are telling the good news of his love to everybody they meet and everybody they know. And that's the only way it'll be done. This particular passage is one that gets my attention in such a way that I want to help others to realize that they are in where they are in that place of employment, in that place of education or recreation or wherever they are, as a messenger of the Lord of hosts. They're there to tell people good news because how are they going to call on one they don't believe in? How are they going to believe unless they hear? And how will they hear unless somebody tells them? And why would someone go against the grain of this society and go against political correctness and everything else to talk about the good news of Jesus Christ in a public place unless, first of all, they realize that the creator of this universe has sent them to do so? Let me start with an illustration. Let's for a moment imagine that we are a group of people that have been somehow marooned on a deserted island. It's not very big, but we've been there for a number of years. And we've all gotten to the place where we really are living in hopelessness. Hopeless, any attempt at all for our rescue has long since passed. We know that no one now, after these many years, nobody's searching for us anymore. And so we've learned how to scratch out a living on this island, even at each other's expense. It's survival of the fittest, because we're all living in hopeless desperation. And then you find yourself somewhere in a remote part of that island one day, and a helicopter lands. And the fellow gets out and he says, I don't have room to save all of you. And I don't want to take you with me because what I want to do is I want to go back and send a rescue team to come and take you out of here, all of you. Your job is to go and tell the others. No matter what their reaction is, you must let them know that they must be ready because the rescue is coming. And they must be ready. And so he takes off, and you head back to where the others are, and you begin to find people, and you try to share with them. It's no longer hopeless. There's a rescue that's coming. There's a rescuer that will arrive and take us all back to something much far better than this. And they won't listen. They reject your message. They make fun of you for having hope in the midst of hopelessness. And yet you can't stop. You can't quit because you have one thing to do, just one thing to accomplish in order for anybody but yourself to be saved. I find that that's kind of the emphasis that we need to put on the fact that after we're buried with Christ in the waters of baptism, why doesn't he take us home? Instead, he sends us back out into our world to say, without shame, without fear, without shyness. He didn't give us a spirit of timidity. We have one thing to accomplish, and that's to make sure that every single creature during every generation of time that he allows to exist gets an opportunity to hear the tremendous truth of God's love without question. And to do it boldly, do it in love, and do it in a way in which you would want it to be told to you if you were the one that were lost and they were the one that were saved. But do it in such a way that there's urgency involved. He's coming, and he will take us home, but we must be ready. And share the gospel with them in the same attitude of love that he made the gospel possible by his death on the cross. I think of it kind of like it was in the days of Ezekiel, in Ezekiel chapter 2. I remember the day that I first saw this passage, and I thought, wow, that sounds just like us. In Ezekiel chapter 2, beginning with verse 3, he said, Son of man, I send you to the people of Israel, to a nation of rebels who have rebelled against me, and their fathers have transgressed against me to this very day. The people also are impotent and stubborn. I send you to them, and you shall say to them, Thus saith the Lord. It's not our message we're trying to deliver. It's the message of salvation that God has sent us to tell. It's his message. He says, and whether they hear or refuse to hear, for they are a rebellious house, they will know that there has been a prophet among them, a messenger of God. They will know that one has been here. And you, son of man, do not be afraid of them, nor be afraid of their words. Their briars and thorns are with you, and you'll sit upon scorpions. Be not afraid of their words. Don't be dismayed at their looks, for they are a rebellious house, and you shall speak my word to them, whether they hear or refuse to hear, for they are a rebellious house. God never said it was going to be easy, but he's given us one thing to do, to be his messengers. Take the message of Jesus Christ to those that are lost, and then to edify and build up and mature the saved to the point where you're able to equip them to go and teach the ones that are lost that they know in their world. Connie and I had an opportunity to travel the country for 11 years in a motorhome, 10 years full time. We're still doing it, but out of 2 fixed locations now. It's amazing as we go into work with a church that's either stagnant or spiraling slowly downward. They do not realize why they exist in that community. They've lost sight of the commission that's been given to them. And to talk again about the commission, about how God has sent us to tell the good news to every creature, to make disciples in every nation. How we are the ones that stand between God's love and them. To be their messenger, to tell them. To be the lighthouse to that community. And I say, why aren't we doing more of that? Why don't we talk to more people about Jesus? Individually now, why don't you talk to more people about Jesus? And instantly, the response is fear. It's not shame. We don't have anything to be ashamed of, but we're afraid. It's fear. And as that response is the one that I always know is coming, and it's happened over 300 times in places that I've been and asked that question, why don't we share the gospel with people that we know? Fear. Fear of what? Fear of rejection is always the first answer. And I said, well, that's no new problem. Satan's been using that one for a long time. In John chapter 12, verse 42 and 43, John records these words, that there were many of the authorities that believed in Jesus, but they wouldn't confess it, for they feared being put out of the synagogue. There's the fear of rejection. And then in verse 13, John 12 and verse 13 or 43, he says, for they love the praise of men more than the praise of God. He defines for us what fear of rejection, caring more about what people think of us if we try to tell them good news. Trying to tell them good news isn't anything we should be afraid of, but we're more concerned about what they think than what God would think if we didn't. I often think of the illustration of standing on the deck of a ship and seeing there's a man in the water down there, and you had a conversation with him before he fell in, and he made it clear to you that he didn't know how to swim. And so there he is. He's down there. He's in the water, and he's drowned, and he didn't know how to swim. And right next to you is a life preserver. But you don't throw it. You say, why is he drowning? Many would answer, because you didn't throw the life preserver. No, he's drowning because he's in the water and he can't swim. People in our world are dying in sin, and they're dying lost and living in hopelessness. And the gospel is the only thing that will save. It's the only power to salvation. You say, why are they dying lost? Well, they're dying lost because they're living in sin. But their only hope is for us to share the message of Jesus Christ with them. My next door neighbor, I found out from another neighbor that he's going through chemo right now with stomach cancer, and it doesn't look good. So I took my book over to him and sat down and tried to start a conversation with him and asked him if he'd be interested in reading the book that I'd put together, and he said he would. And I had some guests coming in. My son was coming from Michigan, so I knew I was going to be busy for a few days. I said, read through the first 3 lessons and write down your questions on the back pages that are blank, and let me know what questions you have, and I'd like to get back together with you as soon as my guests are gone. My son got on the plane Thursday, and this last Friday, I went over and knocked on his door. He said, boy, do I have questions for you. I found out he'd been a police officer in Chicago for 30 years. The first questions he asked was about all the problems that exist in Chicago with all the murders that take place. He said, is there any hope? I said, there certainly is. The hope is Jesus. And he said, how can that happen? And he began to quote to me the population of that particular area of Chicago where most of the trouble is, and how can that happen? And I said, one at a time. Let's start with you. Let's talk about your personal relationship with a God that loves you and he'll never stop. And take that message back to the people one at a time. And when one tells another and another tells another and we begin to multiply, things can change. We don't need to live in helpless desperation. We don't need to be like the people on that island that absolutely wouldn't listen to the only hope that there was. They'd given up hope. And that's the case in many of the communities in which our church, our brothers and sisters live. We must first realize we've been sent. We're the ones that have been sent. We don't need to have fear of being rejected. What are we afraid of? Telling them good news? We have nothing to be ashamed of. We have nothing to be shy about. Heard of a family, long history of heart disease. A young fellow was in the hospital, trying to recover from a heart attack that he'd had. While he's in there, a rich uncle of his, same family, same heart disease, rich uncle died, left the fellow that was in the hospital $1 million. Everybody's afraid to tell him that he just inherited $1 million. So they said, we'll send the preacher over here. He can let it be gentle and bring the news to him gently. So the preacher pulled up his chair next to his bed and said, what would you do if you inherited $1 million? The guy quickly responded, I'd give it to the church. And the preacher had a heart attack, died right there on the spot. What are we afraid of? If we tell people good news, it's going to hurt them? No, it's the only hope and the only help they have. And we're the ones that have been sent. And they're not going to kill us. If they do, we get to go to heaven. What's the deal with that? But we're afraid of being rejected. Other people say, I'm afraid I just won't do it right. I had one lady that was in a workshop I was doing. She came up afterwards. She said, I'm a nurse. I'm taking a refresher course on doing CPR right now. Everybody in the class knows how to do CPR, but it's a refresher course. The guy said, how many of you are afraid of doing CPR? Every hand in the room went up. He said, let me guess, you're afraid you're not going to do it right. Everybody said, that's right. He said, listen to me. They're dead already, or you wouldn't be doing CPR. She said, it's kind of that way with the gospel, isn't it? Yeah, spiritually speaking, because of sin, they're dead already. We're the only hope they have of being born all over again, starting with new life. Why are we afraid? What are we afraid of? Telling them good news? We have nothing to be ashamed of. We have nothing to be shy about. According to the scriptures that I read, and you do too, we're the only hope. That the people in this world that are living in hopeless desperation, we're the only hope they have. Evangelism gets a lot easier. Those of you that take my class have heard these points before, but listen, evangelism gets a lot easier when we know for sure what evangelism is. It's telling good news. T.C. Niles wrote a book, and in it he had this quote, evangelism is one beggar telling another beggar where he found bread. You've probably heard that before. Telling what you already know about Jesus to people that you already know. Start with the people that you know. And when you've told everybody you know, go out and meet some more folk. Get out a little more. Begin to meet people that you didn't know before. Share with them the gospel. It's their only hope. You're God's chosen race. You're a royal priesthood. You're God's people. Is there anyone in this room that deserves those kind of descriptions? We didn't earn that. We didn't do anything to deserve to be God's people. It's what he did at the cross. But the next phrase describes the purpose that he has. Once we surrender our life to Jesus and are buried with him in the waters of baptism and our sin is taken away, he says that you might declare the wonderful deeds of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Go tell people what he's done for you. He didn't do it just for you. Tell them what he's done for them. We have nothing to be shy about, nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to be afraid of. We certainly become a whole lot more aware of how easy evangelism becomes when we realize he did it for everybody. The grace of God has appeared for the salvation of all men. There's only one mediator between God and man. It's the man Christ Jesus. When we realize the gospel's for everybody, we have nothing to fear. When we realize that we can overcome our fears with a greater fear. The kind of fear that Solomon was talking about when he said, here's the whole duty of man, fear God and keep his commandments. He's not talking about this. He's talking about this. When we're so overwhelmed, the absolute marvel and the power and the perfection and the holiness of a God that loves us and would become flesh and dwell among us to become our only hope, our rescuer, our redeemer. We have nothing to be ashamed of. When our fears are overcome by a greater kind of fear, standing in awe of God and the awareness of the commission he's given us. Besides, Jesus already did the hard part. He left heaven itself to come and put on flesh and to be offered as a sacrifice so that our salvation and our neighbor's salvation would be possible. He's already done the hard part. He just asked us to go tell people about it. Evangelism becomes a lot easier when we realize every day that we get up that our purpose for living must be the same as his purpose for giving us life that day. Start every day by saying, Lord, help me today to be aware of why you give me life this day. Thank you, Lord, for life this day, but help me to realize the purpose that you have for me existing on this planet today. Help me fulfill your purpose today. When our purpose for living is the same as his purpose for giving us life, then praise God, and he will be glorified when we accomplish his will. When we see other people's needs as our opportunity to serve. I missed one yesterday, and I was up half the night thinking about it. I came out of Denny's. Michael Green and I came out of Denny's from having lunch yesterday. There's a fellow sitting there having a cigarette right outside of Denny's. And I sat down beside him, and he began to describe to me the hopelessness that he was living in. Lost his job, had nowhere to go, needed to find some way to get off the street. And because we were in a hurry to go someplace, I listened. And did nothing except say, God bless, have a good day. You say, why am I telling you this? Because I was up half the night thinking about it. All the different things I could have said. I could have given him your name and address. I could have given him your phone number. How many opportunities do we miss? Ask God every day to help you to miss as few as possible and to find every opportunity. When we see other people's needs as our opportunity to serve, God will be glorified. When we understand how to spell success, what's the definition of success when it comes to evangelism? It's certainly not their response. Whether we're successful or not successful does not depend on their response. When we share the gospel message of Jesus Christ with an attitude of love, we have succeeded in doing what God has asked us to do. May God bless us in the doing of it. May we be moved with compassion when we see lost people. And pray and ask God to send harvesters into the harvest, just as he asked the people in Matthew chapter 9. But read it in the context of the rest of the New Testament. We need to do more than pray and ask God to send in the context of all of New Testament Scripture. We are the ones. We are the ones that he sent. May God bless you in the doing of it. May he do it in such a way that he gets all the praise and all the glory. Amen. God bless you.
That's probably a message we should record and play to ourselves regularly. I don't know about you, but I was really enjoying a great lesson on evangelism and taking care of people, and then Jerry balled up his fist and hit me right in the stomach. Did you get that? I'm grateful to God for you. You're a watchman on the wall calling us all to do what we ought to be doing. And Jerry, I appreciate that. I also appreciate the fact that you're better at living that message than you are at talking about it. And I'm grateful. Because God's not going to send the apostles back, bring the angels home. He depends on us. And appreciate that reminder. And I'll eventually get my breath back from where you punched me. But as we think about the multitudes of people we've passed, Let's pass no more.